Hey everybody, Bootsy Greenwood here, and I am breaking down Transurfing chapter by chapter. Today we're talking about Dances with Shadows, chapter 16, and we're going to go into a little bit more advanced ideas about these pendulums, okay? That's really what this whole chapter is about. It's a lot to unpack, so let's go ahead and get into it, okay? He starts again talking about some interesting things, judgments being one of those things. He talks about how everything does sort of become mundane to us as we continue to get used to it. And this is an important thing to keep in mind as we're visualizing slides. That's what sort of deteriorates the slide, and then we sort of step into it and live in there. And then at that point, you know, maybe we need to do some more work and continue to extend our awareness and our perception with more slides. But just keep in mind that if it seems out of reach or weird or out of place, like you couldn't accomplish it, then you won't be able to accomplish it because you feel that way. Like literally because of that emotion that keeps you from the desired goal. So figure out what the best way is for you to learn how to believe that you could have, like allow yourself to have. He talks about judgments in this chapter and how it's not necessarily wrong to label someone necessarily so much, or to say like that's this person, that's just a type of person they are, as long as you're not comparing yourself against them, right? If you're saying, well, they're shit, so, that makes me a good person, or they live this way, so I'm better than that. That energy is gonna cause excess potential, and it is going to backfire upon you. So I would recommend not doing that. We'll get to more of this. Okay, Sod's law, or like the law that whatever can go wrong will go wrong. There's proof in transurfing in the negative. Okay, and you can visually see this. You can try it out for yourself. Certainly, you see this happen. We talked about how cycles happen, right? Negative, really, or positive, and at any point, a negative thing could bring and start to tear away, and completely you could just run off course. And that's another good reason not to judge, right? Because there's a lot of people who are a lot less fortunate than maybe you or I are in this moment, and it's always good to be grateful for that. Remember that we can only go up as much as we can appreciate, and the more we reflect and radiate love and all those good things toward our world and try to serve it, the more that the world's going to give us in return. So pendulums, okay? I talked a little bit about like how are there macro pendulums and micro pendulums. Maybe that's not the right analogy, but what I like to think is that there are like these small irritations that happen. And there are also these much bigger ideas, right? The pendulums are happening in our subconscious mind. And he talks about some pretty interesting concepts. Like if you've ever seen somebody like walking down the street and you're trying to pass by them, right? And you want to go past them, but they just kind of speed up a little bit. Like you see it in traffic too with cars, right? Like why you got to pull up 3 inches, right to the next, it's just this thing that we just automatically go up and do that, and we don't even understand it, right? Like it's completely subconscious. We're not even aware of it. But if you want real proof in transurfing, you can do it one of 2 ways. You could implement thinking negatively and push that, or you could try the positive approach and push that. Because whatever you hate, you are drawing to you in abundance. If you hate apples and you go around talking about how much you hate apples, then you are metaphysically asking to stuff them in your pockets. So just keep in mind, pendulums feed on positive and negative energy, and they really like to really amp up irritations, right? And so I'll get to that in just a second. So when we're alone, we are pretty like relaxed, and we are not that aware. We're not super self-aware. When we are in a small group, we are the most aware. We're hypersensitive of what's going on and what everybody's thinking of me, right? And then we're in a crowd, we are a lot more susceptible to whatever predominant energy is happening in that crowd. So just an important thing to keep in mind, that we want to wake up. We want to be aware, He talks about like you want to be you want to be performing, but you also want to be in the theater observing what's happening. So it's good. It doesn't mean you can't enjoy the moment and the spirit of things, but just keep in mind that these pendulums are dominating most people's thoughts. If you're in a big crowd, or even when you're alone and you're just like bleh, right? Are all pendulums destructive? Well, this is an interesting idea. I think that there are some that are not necessarily destructive, and a lot of people, when they collaborate and come together, can put together energy in a really cool way. And especially if they're detached from it, I think that they can have a little bit of success with that. So I don't think necessarily all pendulums are destructive, but we've got to wake up and be aware that it's a pendulum. So if you build a pendulum that really does, you've heard the term, the path to hell is paved with good intentions. Let's think of that, okay? And let's take an example that may or may not be super influenced, or maybe people just don't know, right? Like, let's talk about maybe the Green Revolution or something, right? We're gonna feed the world, we're gonna use these substances and feed the world, right? Maybe there's some really good intention there, maybe not, I don't know, but do your own research. But, like at that point, the decision's made and it becomes this pendulum, and it starts to roll out of control and get bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's gonna push and push and push. So the more energy a pendulum starts to get from you, the more it wants to take. And so even when we're in these smaller things, like these macro things, like significant other, whatever, just like ribs you, and you're just like, and just you get caught up in that script, that gesture's just jumping and leaping, and it just wants more, it just wants more, it just wants to continue the controversy, it just wants to continue all the tension and fight and just keep blowing that stuff up. And you'll notice, like, sometimes you'll get in such a massive rage, you'll just see red, right? Or people who go on a killing spree will be like, I don't even know what happened, right? I just blacked out and woke up, and then this all unfolded, and I can't even believe that it happened. Like, literally, that happens. People are so under that energy and under that pendulum that they won't even be in control of their own actions. That's why we need to watch and try to stay awake and aware, in order to see ourselves from the theater as participants in the play. These gestures are always enticing us into conflict, right? And so if we acknowledge them and then don't give them any credit, or even better, completely do something that they would never expect, that doesn't follow the script, the set thing that you're supposed to do, then that completely discharges the energy. So again, that's the vaudeville lifeline, which I'm a big fan of. Like, wake up, acknowledge it, do something, crazy. Somebody who's going to try to fight you, tell them they have pretty lips. That's courtesy of a friend. All right, so he talks a little bit about flash mobs and created pendulums. He talks a lot about sex culture, and you see this for sure here, especially in the West, with porn and everything. There's an extreme push to get it further and further and further. That's what happens with the pendulum. And so this sex culture makes it to where very rarely are people probably having their own individual expressions in sex. Most of the time, they're doing something that the monkey see, monkey do, that they saw online, and they think that that's sexy or hot or whatever. And to each their own, 100%. But just keep in mind that, these pendulums have imposed these thoughts and ways of thinking upon us, and they pollute our slides. So keep that in mind. You're seeing these stereotypes being pushed by the media, right? So once it becomes a thing, then it gets pushed as far as it can. And you see this extremity thing go on in any kind of movement. You see it in politics with the left or the right. It's all about the next person who's going to push it even further and push it even further and push it even further. And that's the kind of energy that they're trying to get until they stabilize. And we'll talk about that in just a little while. But that's the second aspect. So those stereotypes are definitely disseminated through media. The author talks about love versus sex. He talks about how sex and love don't necessarily always go together. They might be polarities in that sense. I've experienced this because I have some amazing people in my life that just for whatever reason, we didn't never had that spark, that attraction or whatever. But affection and aggression's more on the sex end, affection's more on the love end. You can see it in nature, that's for sure. So dependency creates polarization. So codependency and depending on other people, that is going to create excess potential as well. And a lot of us, really prescribe to a paradigm where maybe it's just not that feasible for everyone, right? Like we just accept that it's going to be monogamous and that, you're going to meet this person and shack up. But maybe that's just not for everybody. I mean, it doesn't matter, to each their own, really. I'm not saying that you can't have a boyfriend or a girlfriend, of course. The whole idea of transurfing is that you create your own life and you determine it. But if you read a book like Sex at Dawn or something, and you're interested in this topic, I would recommend that book particularly. And you can kind of see how these roles were developed and how things have become the way they are and more systematized, right? Which we're coming to a little bit later as well. This is all going to roll together. Okay, so humanity versus the school of fish. Okay, he starts to talk about pendulums in nature and how school of fish, nobody's really in charge and none of the fish are keying off of that fish. But this is this sort of structure that just is a collective, a small collective conscious that's a pendulum and it's moving on its own stead. He starts to talk about how we as men have figured out this pendulum deal and the rule and how we have used it in modern world. And we started to put together technological grids and things like this and how these pendulum networks start to come together. And then he says, the second rule of the pendulum is to stabilize. So the first rule of the pendulum is to do as I do. It says, hey, this is me, this is what's cool, this is what's happening, whatever. And then you get caught on that, like the second person who said wicked, or the third person who said, rad, or whatever. But then it becomes this thing, and then it stabilizes. So let's think of maybe like political parties or sports teams, right? Like there's a little bit of shifting in sports teams, in this NFL, they'll move from Las Vegas or to Las Vegas, the Raiders did, or, they'll create a new team, like the Houston Texans are a relatively new NFL team or whatever. But for the most part, the NFL as a structure is stable, man. It is real stable. There's a little bit of stuff that's flux and going on, but that thing is relatively cemented in, that whole grid. And so he starts to talk about that and what we're doing around us with technology right now is also worth thinking about, and he talks about that. One thing to touch on real quick is that it's up to us. We have the power and we each create the layer of our own world, right? So we are creating a layer and those are starting to overlap more and more and more. So what do we want to do? We want to figure out what we can do. What can we offer? What can we give to the world that the world needs? The pendulum network is an interesting concept. It's very much like the Matrix. He even talks about the Matrix. And, there's definitely some responsibility that needs to be taken there. And what are you doing? Are you serving the pendulum network? Or are you maybe like one of the indigos that he talks about, right? Like, I don't know what generation exactly the indigos are, but he says that the indigos, they buck authority and they don't like conformity and things because they are a balancing force to this pendulum network to sort of, keep some liberty going, keep things from being cemented into a grid. Because if things do get completely cemented into the grid, then basically no one really can find their individuality that way. You wouldn't be able to probably find the frail of your soul. You would just get put in this box or that box. You would maybe at best feel relatively fulfilled, but nothing like if you break from the rest of society and really do as you do. He talks about eating healthy food, trying not to support things that are part of the establishment that are probably sprayed with a lot of chemicals that are at the grocery store versus maybe buying at the farmer's market. All these like responsible decisions, trying to keep in mind that every single one of our actions, they do add up. And not to like be spreading guilt or anything, but it's just interesting. We do need to think about these kind of things, and it's good that the author brings it up, because we each influence each other, and the way that we should try and reach out is to see how we can help more than to try and push some belief on somebody else. Nobody wants, some idea system shoved on them. But if you can use an idea system to set you apart and to hopefully get you on a track where the pendulums, instead of, you being under their, control and you have the strings on, instead you can glide across the pendulums and use the pendulums and they will light you up. That's the idea. I see a lot of comedians do this. A lot of the more famous comedians can say things that ordinary celebrities would never be able to say or speak out against. But because they're funny, because of the vaudeville lifeline as well, they're able to kind of skate on that, which is a pretty interesting idea. He talks about the Bronikov Institute, I guess. It's in Russia, and they have like a lot of interesting experiments and mental kind of things going on. It's kind of like this matrixy kind of thing. Check it out. You can just Google it and see what's going on there. I thought that was really interesting. But I mean, ask yourself what you need to do. Like ask the world, hey, what do you need from me? What can I provide for you? And the world is going to give you whatever it is that you want. If you serve outer intention, then your inner intention is going to be met. And when we're coming in touch with other people, we're frailing, we're saying, hey, what does this person need? How can I help them? If you give them what they need, then you're going to find what you need. It's very much like that biblical kind of thing. And one thing I also want to touch on too, and I want to say this, no matter what your belief system is based on, you can add transurfing to your repertoire and your set of skills. I personally was a devout Pentecostal who backslid and then discovered transurfing. And I much later I discovered it. This was 15 years ago when I was into the Pentecostal church. But I completely destroyed that belief system, and I built a new one there instead. But you don't have to do that. Like if you're 40 or 50 years old, I wouldn't recommend it. If you're in your 20s, maybe you want to decide how you want to form some of the foundations of your slide, okay? That's just a tip, and no importance there.